Hi, I'm Corinne, and this is Free Press Fail here with John Burnett. Just right before I jumped on this call, impeached Biden is trending on Twitter, and always good to see that one. It's been a good week for him. I think about as good as everyone else's that I've talked to today. I think there's a lot of bad Biden policies really coming to focus this week. The baby formula crisis continues, and he kind of failed to comfort anyone this week. He actually did a White House conference, or not conference, actually. It wasn't an official press conference, but he just actually talked to the press. And he just told them he had no idea. No one could have predicted. And that on top of his gun control agenda, his popularity ratings just, you think that they've hit the bottom and they just keep sinking lower.
Yeah, it's madness. You mentioned the baby formula. What those who could vote for Biden and future voters are not liking Biden right now.
Yeah.
It's completely ridiculous. Slow to act, slow to understand the risks. And I think America has been educated on the level of government control that they didn't even know existed concerning the FDA and baby formula, right? And he admitted that he didn't know, right, which I highly doubt, and he's slow to react. So this is a manufactured crisis that they fail to monitor and control.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to compare to how reactionary this gun control effort is. He has no plan for baby formula. He's saying he couldn't predict that crisis. You absolutely could. Meanwhile, he's acting almost immediately, trying to ban weapons, increase background checks. His whole agenda, which I actually thought the speech that he proposed, the gun control regulation, was incredibly weak, because he starts it off saying he wants to ban assault rifles, but if he can't, here's 10 more other things that he wants to do. And I'm like, look, I'm not on Biden's side, but if you're not going to be on your own side for this argument, why even give it? He starts off against himself. I want this, but if we can't do that, this other stuff would be fine too. I'm like, come on, you can't even stick with your own argument for a complete sentence?
It sounds like it's a tug of war between his staff members. And it seems like nobody could win within his staff. So they just throw a word salad together and he goes out and gives the speech. The thing is that his speech was so far left for a person that he tries to, as he describes himself to be, in the middle, someone that brings about unity. That's not what we heard. Someone speaking from the middle would say, listen, I'm not here to talk about the right or left. I'm here to talk about the middle. Many of Americans see it reasonable to raise the minimum age to 21.
Not me, for the record, but some Americans do.
Right. Some Americans do. And he should be speaking from the middle, making the point that, yeah, the right would have to give up some things and the left would have to give up some things if we're going to reach bipartisan legislation. If each side dig their heels in the ground, then we don't move forward, not only on common sense gun reform or legislation, whatever word you want to choose, or any other category of legislation. There are too many people running to their respective corners, blue and red, ready to fight, but no one's willing to say, okay, what is a reasonable concession that really doesn't restrict?
Well, this is the reason that the right, I will tell you, I don't believe, I'm not giving up one right. I'm not giving up anything. And I don't want anyone who does. I don't want bipartisan legislation, because this is how we all always do it. And Republicans are so good. What can I give to you? Like, let's come to the middle. And liberals come out there and say, we want a ban. We want this. We want this. They have their list of wants. We gave up something. What did they give us?
Yeah, but I think that's the wrong approach.
Nobody actually wants that.
I think that's the wrong approach, and we'll go nowhere with that. And I don't think even intimate relationships, whether people are married or not, I don't think that's a way to manage a healthy relationship, right? So when you look at it, yeah, the left is talking about banning AR-15s and things of that nature. That is a non-starter. That's taken off the table, right? Because again, each side digging in their heels right? Nothing is going to get done. But coming to the table, like, you know what? It's a non-starter for AR-15 bans, right? But possibly, right? Some people on the right and left says, you know what? I think it's reasonable to raise it to 21. It doesn't go against the Second Amendment in terms of the last four words shall not be infringed. It's not raising the minimum age does not take the right away in its entirety. It doesn't. And that's a false argument I think that a lot of people are making.
I love this because this is the first time John and I will totally, completely disagree on something. Not the only, I am sure. But I cannot do that. I think that this is a thing that the Republicans have done this for 40 years. And you know what? Our party stays in one place and the left keeps going to the left and we have to keep going to chase them into the middle. I'm not for that. And I'm not for raising the age to 21 arbitrarily because we think that's a compromise. Most mass shooters are over the age of 21. Aurora, she was 26, San Bernardino, 29, Pulse nightclub, 28. This is just an arbitrary thing to say, hey, we're going to give you something because we want to give you something for some reason. And I don't feel like we have to at all. But these proposals do not actually prevent mass shootings. We know that. But we feel so compelled to do something that we'll come to the table to do anything. And I am so sick of that. There's no reason for that. And these same Democrats, including Joe Biden, voted to send how many 18-year-old boys to fight in foreign wars, armed them with actual military-grade weapons, which are nothing like the ones that you can purchase in stores, despite liberal rhetoric. They sent them overseas to fight wars when they were 18, sometimes 17 years old, but they can't buy a weapon in a store after they've passed a background check because 20,000 people a year die from mostly handgun violence. It is such a shallow attempt at compromise. I cannot even believe that we still do this.
I think that's a false equivalent. When you talk about military grade automatic weapons, right? They are not just handed automatic weapons. It's in a controlled environment. They're properly trained, right? And it's within a military confinement. It's not in public. So I think it's two separate things when we talk about automatic weapons within the military versus semi-automatic weapons in the public domain. So I don't think we should crisscross those things or make an analogy using those two. But I do think we need to talk about areas of agreement. Even those on the left who disagree, I think it's reasonable because many people on the left do concede and understand the importance to harden our schools. Schools have been a soft target for decades. Now we need to talk about what does that look like. Teachers that already have the license to carry. Is there additional training that's necessary that acts as an addendum to that license because of certain protocols that should be in place within schools to better protect them? So I think we need to start talking about what we all agree on and what is reasonable to construct a bill. And many times that's the way DC works, whether Republican or Democrat, right? If it doesn't restrict a person from exercising their right, then it makes sense. And to be honest with you, I teach, right? And I often wonder, like, wow, all right, given their lack of focus and lack of responsibility many times at 18 and 19, they have no idea they're going to the polls to vote. And many times they have no idea on how to make a decision, right? So that's voting. Imagine all of the other rights and so forth. So I'm just saying, yes, you make a valid point with regard to the profile of mass shooters being well over 21. But I'm just saying there are certain things that we can all come to agree on in terms of hardening the schools, in terms of possibly 21, striking a balance instead of the hyper-partisanship where we don't go anywhere, where nothing is done.
I want to be on the record. I don't want to do anything. I actually am always in favor of doing nothing. So I think there's always this rhetoric that believes we have to respond with federal legislation. Federal legislation is rarely a solution to anything. And I think we talk ourselves into this reactionary thing where we believe the only thing to do to respond to any kind of heartache or hardship is to pass a law. And I do not believe that. I think a law always creates an obstacle. So you can.
So let's talk specifics. Are you saying that you're against hardening schools?
I do not want federal legislation to regulate school districts at all. I don't want the Department of Education to exist. This is not me being hypocritical. I am completely aware of the statement that I am making. And you can disagree with it, but it is not because I am ignorant of what it means. I do not believe in federal regulation of local schools. That should be managed at a local level. If you want to harden your schools, I believe you have a right to do that. You should do that on the city and county level where school regulations are passed. Federal regulation puts the big government in every single city in America. I do not want that, whether it's for a good cause or not. It is abused anytime that they want to. At what point do we set the precedent that, well, we wanted to harden our schools? Well, they can do whatever they want. They have federal officers in every school now. How do we confirm that for years that is going to work in our favor? We just gave them that entry, like that power over our kids and over our education system.
I don't know that there's federal officers in
Well, if
in
you're
public
passing federal regulation to harden schools, who would manage that?
Well, the thing, you can manage it locally, right? Like many other things are managed locally that are also partly funded by federal funds.
And then they do this thing like they're doing.
But if teachers want that right, I don't see why that's an issue. I really don't.
Well, it's actually, I believe that it's federal regulation currently that says if a teacher has a concealed carry weapon, they cannot take it into schools because of gun-free zones, which is a federal regulation. So,
right. So we should take that away.
That it's caused?
We should take that away and redefine it where it gives some guidelines and structure to allow teachers to come in to not only protect themselves, but to protect other stakeholders, namely the children within those schools, because it's a soft target. But doing nothing, it's just allowing that soft target to happen. Now, one way to do it would be to get rid of
it happen in the first place.
Sorry,
doing is what happened in the first place, because we have.
I'm not talking about doing something. I'm talking about doing something strategic and pointed. I am not talking abstract. I'm talking details.
But that is what always happens. We pass something on the federal level, it's manipulated to the point that it doesn't benefit the public anymore, and we're wondering how the heck did the Department of Education become one of the top funded agencies in America when our kids don't know how to read? How is so much
hardening schools is not something. It is a step in the right direction that many Americans on the right, left, and middle want. So it's not just something. Now we could talk. There's different ways to actually bring it about, and it should be reviewed and managed, right, locally, right? So that way you don't have huge government overreach, but it's also a combination of federal, state, and local funding.
If you pass it federally, though, we'll see it just like we see, school lunches now. Biden says if you're not doing the transgender bathroom, like boys can go in girls' bathrooms in schools, you don't get your school lunch funding for your school because there's federal money there. So they use that money as puppet strings for local institutions. And that is just what this becomes. Like, I'm not against hardening schools as a point. That may be the case, but that should be worked out, not on the federal level. And that's where the conversations are right now, because that's the most media-centric level of government. They're so excited to jump into the spotlight to do something. And what happens is we lose our power and parents lose their control. And I don't know how many times we have to see this happen, that any ounce, you give the federal government an inch, and they will use it to pull your strings for the rest of your life. And they've done this to education for the last 50 years, and now we're inviting them in.
Well, I'm the youngest of 7, and I grew up in New York, so I know how to fight. And I think, if the federal government wants to play that game, right? States have rights and have strength as well, because the federal government needs the states, just like the states need the federal government. So it's an interdependent relationship. If the federal government says, we're not, to use your example, we're not going to give you funding unless you teach this, there are countless things that the state can say, we're not going to do X if you try to impose this, right? So we need to play chess, not checkers, when it comes to the checks and balances on government control.
Well, I couldn't agree more there. I just think we have seen a failure of states to do that for a long time. And I'm a Nevadan, which was historically, Nevada was so anti-federal government, despite 98% of our land being owned by the federal government. We went to the Supreme Court. We refused to lower the speed limits in Nevada. And for years, they didn't give us money. And we stood up and said, we're just not doing it. Fine, we don't want the money. But eventually it becomes so necessary because it's not an interdependent relationship anymore. It's complete dependence. And at some point, we reached the point where we needed that money to compete with other states because they were handing out so much to other states. And Nevada caved, and I wish obviously that they had not, because clearly I'm an ideologue on this particular issue. But they have caved on everything. We lowered our speed limits. Our schools are mostly funded by federal money, which, by the way, we forget. It's all our money. The government does not have any of their own money. Right. It is all our money. But I think you're right. It's a great thing to see the states and the federal government battle it out. I would love that. They don't do that though. And
I'd say let's do it.
Seen that time and time again. So
I'd say let's do it. I love a good fight.
Yeah, I mean, clearly I do too. I'm always ready to fight, but I don't see that happening because the state and the federal government no longer feel like they have to represent the people. They're their own thing, and they're working together on something. They're not working together to represent us. They're working together to increase the size of their own governments. And I don't want to give them one more inch so that they have another mile, because who knows where that's going. Give them 5 years and I'll have something to rant about because they armed the schools, and now we have to deal with that too. So if they want to arm the schools, I'm fine with that. And every teacher who has a concealed weapon, I don't think that there should have been a federal regulation that says they cannot bring it to class. If they took their courses, if they're in line with their state permitting processes, of course, they should be able to conceal wherever they are. It's federal government that sets these regulations that say schools are gun-free zones and makes them sitting ducks. And then they come to the rescue to harden our schools that have been made a target by blatant overreach in the first place. So I'm not very hopeful that there's a legislative fix to this, at least federally. And I will always be the one when someone says, we can't just do nothing. Yes, we could do nothing. That would be better. It is sometimes better to be aware that you cannot solve this crisis. This is a deeper thing than a law. You can't take evil from this world through legislation. And I think there needs to be some perspective here about what greater evil can be done when you continue to give power to the government. That does not work.
Well, I'm not for do nothing, and I'm not for do something. I'm for doing whatever is prudent. And there's no perfect solution on earth other than God. However, there are trade-offs. We have to figure out what is the right trade-off without giving up our rights for the pursuit of the most safe environment possible. And that's a delicate dynamic. And many people don't want to talk that through because they're dug in their respective trenches. But I do think that, once we peel back the political elements and so forth, I think that we could arrive at a comprehensive solution that's not overreaching, that doesn't infringe on Second Amendment rights. And I think if it's crafted, and it doesn't need to be a whole lot, it doesn't need to be 2,000 pages either, right? I'm a business person. You could probably put this on a 3-page brief, if that long. And I live in New York, and I'd like to carry just for the sake of exercising my rights. But New York City has huge restrictions, and only people that are armed are the criminals. And we see how unsafe New York is progressively reaching and going down the wrong path with other legislation that makes it even more unsafe. But I think we can also agree that part of the discussion, whether you attach it to gun sense or just general things that we should do anyway with respect to mental health. I don't understand. I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, there were mental health institutions. I didn't see people walking around without help. Right? Now it seems like those institutions have been shut down, not only locally in New York, but I speak to other people in states outside of New York, and they say, hey, the same thing is going on here. Institutions have been shut down for decades, and all these people are running wild on the streets. When you combine that with senseless bail reform, we have mass destruction on the streets. So we have to do the right thing and sensible thing, not do nothing and not just do something for the sake of doing something. I think we need to look at these things holistically to figure out what needs to be done.
And I couldn't agree more. I do think there is a huge mental health crisis. I think the COVID lockdowns definitely contributed to a growing problem that was reaching kind of terrible levels. Actually, if you want to talk about epidemic, we're talking about gun violence, which gun violence kills about 20,000 people a year, and gun deaths, as they count them, are 50,000. And that is because almost 30,000 of those deaths are actually suicides, which is terrible. Right. And I think that indicates a mental health crisis in those numbers. Like, even if you want to just focus on gun numbers, those are gun deaths. So whenever you see a blanket gun death, that's always including suicide. Really high. But it's much higher than gun violence. And then in between 2020 and 2021, almost 100,000 people died of drug overdoses. Mm-hmm. And that is another sign. That is also mental illness. And I think, I actually haven't seen his response to this gun control legislation, but I read a few years back, Greg Gutfeld had a book, it was called Not Cool, about how liberals shame people into certain societal decisions. Also really funny, highly recommend. But he had this one really point that always stuck out to me about mental institutions and about people who needed help, that for years, if you had a crazy aunt or something, that you committed her and got her help, and you didn't just let her live on the streets and be crazy. But there's this movement now that you can't tell people that they're sick. If they're doing something wrong, it's not cool to tell them that they're ill. You should just accept that your dad's an alcoholic, he just drinks too much. Let him have some fun. Why are you being like that? So your friend does drugs. They don't like to be sober. Why are you being controlling? There's this movement to not call people out for behavior that contributes to terrible societal downfalls. And it always stuck with me because I do feel like that as much as we have encouraged therapy and encouraged people to be open about their mental illness, we've also silenced people and made them feel guilty for thinking someone might not be all right. And I think that has hurt so many people who are ill because we couldn't, if you don't offer help, no one can accept it.
Absolutely.
And I think that is a terrible thing that's happened in the last couple decades.
I agree. I think you said it very eloquently, and I think, you were politically correct. I don't want to be so politically correct on that topic, and I'll just go ahead and say it's a movement that's under demonic influence, right? I don't belong to the satanic world, but there's a saying in that world, so I'm told, do what thou wilt. In other words, do whatever pleases you, right? And I think a branch of that thought process is to shame others for looking into or correcting things that are out of norm, that are not normal, or a deviation or aberration. And I think that mindset, if not checked, right, because we already see the bad results up to this point, if it continues, we are going to see at the federal, state, and local level laws that are passed that continue to allow this unchecked and uncontrolled, element in our society, right? That shames people, that go against things that are common sense. It's common sense. If you see someone with a substance abuse problem, or you see someone, whether it's depression or other forms of mental health issues, if you see someone that needs some level of correction, even those, right, that have committed crimes, we don't just say no bail reform. We don't just say throw them back out on the street. We don't say, hey, when people have problems, whether it be mental health, substance abuse, or otherwise, we don't just push out problems in the street. We see a common thread. That is senseless. That is not a civilized society. And I think those that have pushed that mindset needs to be checked. So that way we can restore balance in our society.
Absolutely. And I agree. I mean, I think sometimes like, wow, I can see this as a problem and still acknowledge how much a part of it I am. I don't really know my neighbors at all. If my neighbor was struggling, I don't think I would know because I don't really talk to them. I don't know, how often they stay inside and how often they go out. Like I should make an effort to be a better neighbor, to know, to help people who might need help, and vice versa. When I need help, they might know that.
Right.
But I think it's weird, especially so many people work from home. I work from home most of the time. I think I was just talking to my mom the other day and she said, when I was younger, I thought if someone was a shut-in, like never left their house or anything, you're like, okay, that person, that's a red flag. Like they're either sad or ill, or they need someone checking on them because they never leave and they don't talk to anyone. But now we're so used to people just communicating digitally, like staying at home. I don't go to work. I work from my computer. No one would really know. Well, I'm always doing this. So I guess if you might know if I stop showing up, you might know. But I think that we're also separate and we aren't there for each other. And sometimes you're not even sure that you're supposed to be there because we're so used to working in these little isolated, we're just isolated. So,
well, in the urban community, we have a saying it takes a village to raise a child, right? And there's no way that a village can help raise a child if there aren't if you don't have a common set of values and principles, right? And if you don't check on your neighbors and have some type of interpersonal relationship that's not just dependent on digital, right? Or other online methods, but actually engagement. And I think we've lost that. And when we lose that, I like to say common touch. When we lose the common touch, we slowly become a callous society that is only concerned about self and not about community. We cease to become neighbors. And that in and of itself is not American.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it is one of those terrible things. Even now, like this Uvalde shooting, terrible. There's all of these people coming out now like, oh, there was this sign and he was hurting animals and he was always upset and he fought with his parents. And, it's unhelpful at this point to know all of those things. Like, and what he did was unforgivable. And, God will judge that, not me. Unforgivable to me. But he's still a kid. And there were so many signs that
the first life that was taken was his grandmother.
Yeah.
That's the first, and we should not overlook that, right? Because the family, I'm quite sure there's other people in the community that saw something and to your point, said nothing, right? But even, I'm quite sure the family knew. And I think the family, there's a lot more information about him that the family's not disclosing.
Absolutely. And
but he's home and then it went to the school. So we have to make sure that we have, we can offer help But we have to also make sure that we're communicating as a society.
Yeah. And I mean, that breakdown, even that he was living with his grandma, was his family wasn't there. And, that's not an excuse of, I grew up in a single parent household myself, and I did not go down that path, but I had a very dedicated mom who made sure if I ever was crying for help that she answered me. And I think what is so sad, like we're saying, is sometimes that you don't have that at home, but you should have that next door. You should have that at school. But if you've intimidated people into not saying anything, you're hurting that person who's crying for help, but then maybe you're hurting more people because something like this could happen. And it's not an excuse for the violence, because people survive terrible situations and they don't act out this way. But we can be better people to try to help those who struggle and might have that inclination towards violence. And it's just terrible to see, because we jump to these legislative fixes like this is about the gun, but I think, God, this is about the kid. He's so young. That should never have happened, and someone should have helped him, and someone should have seen this, and someone should have said something. And you can't legislate that. That's a cultural response.
But we can fund it, right? We can fund resources for mental health treatment, right? And when it comes to mental health, there are different levels and stages, right? So without the resources to address the problem, and to your point, this current crazy culture that doesn't even want to address certain things because, I don't want to be seen as bad for even bringing it up or even discussing what you see as abnormal or behavior or aberration or deviation, if you will, from basic norms, from observing the individual. So I think we need to make sure that we can come to the table and undo a lot of these things that are a stranglehold on our society, and properly fund things that we ought to.
I think there's definitely some opportunities for improvement there. That is obviously, I think, dominating in so many ways, because this issue is so multifaceted. So we have this gun control debate, this mental health thing, and then there's this issue of family and community, and then this progressive agenda, the influence of that. But I mean, I guess there's the other big news of the day is kind of covered up by all of this. There's actually a huge story this week about election integrity, that there's a report from our computer science agency, CISA, about how Dominion voting machines could be hacked and change votes and count them wrong, and that there are 16 vulnerable states, which you can name all of them because the same 16 states used Dominion voting machines in 2020. And this hasn't been widely picked up by the media, I think, because it's kind of a difficult line to draw. They drew a hard line in the sand that if you doubt the integrity of our elections, then you are threatening democracy, and that you're crazy, basically. Speaking of someone saying you're not cool, it's really not cool to question the integrity of an election. But now we have a government agency saying whether or not you think that Trump was right about the 2020 election results, they are saying what he said, which is these machines are vulnerable, the votes can be changed, and we should look into this. And they're basically saying these states shouldn't even use them in 2022.
Wow. I think it's too late for that.
Yeah.
You know how slow government moves. However, I think common sense individuals, and we're losing them daily on the left and right, we should take this report seriously. But not just look at the machines, look at our processes and controls, right? Because we've seen a lot of breakdown in controls, oversight, and things of that nature, as well as the machines. So we have to have the will on the left and right to move forward to say, possibly if you still use these machines, I know it'll never happen, right? If you use these machines, it could cause a problem, and figure out what is the right resolution, right? We can't just say there's a problem with this machine. What is the resolution to using that technology and that platform? And then what processes and controls that you need to have in place to make sure that we don't see what we saw in 2020 in terms of more ballots, mail-in ballots, than you have, envelopes, right? And you drop boxes and things of that nature. So it's the machines and the processes that we need to make sure that we control. And we have stupid, nonsensical legislation is being passed. I'll use New York as an example. Non-citizens voting. It's ridiculous. We already know they're not just going to vote, but not all of them possibly, but enough of them, right? Even if one votes, that's a violation of not only state constitution, but the U.S. Constitution. So we have to make sure that, we bring common sense back. And if we bring common sense back, right behind it will be election integrity.
Yeah, I think it's so funny to me because it's just like these executive agencies are so partisan. Unfortunately, they're like barely ever skewed to the right because the same people stay there regardless of who's in office, and they just kind of tend to skew liberal. So this report was clearly like made with an intention, like a warning about 2022, but then it included but 2020 was the most secure election in history. But also, as like the same states that you're criticizing, it's, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona. Like, we've heard of these states before. We've heard of election integrity claims. And they're like, but this is separate and different. We're totally not like Trump, who's an idiot, and we are smart. I was like, okay, hilarious. But full disclosure, they did not question the integrity of the 2020 election. They're only going to question the integrity of 2022. So just for the record, 2016, Russia stole the election from Hillary Clinton. 2018, the election in Georgia was stolen from Stacey Abrams, and there were 2 contested races in Florida for Ron DeSantis and, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? The senator. It's because I don't like him. Oh my gosh, I won't forgive myself. But the Senate race was contested as well in Florida. Big thing. 2020, most secure election in history. And then 2022, we're back to up in the air. We can't trust our voting system. So that's not partisan. I think that's just facts. Follow the science.
When the government double talks, it's never a good sign, right? They don't want, like to your point, they don't want you to question 2020. But at the same time, now they're saying, oh, there are some issues, right? But not enough to have influenced the 2020 election. But, it might actually undermine certain things going forward. You'd have to be a complete idiot, right? If you don't see that as double talk, hypocrisy, right? But at the same time saying, okay, if we have these issues, to our previous discussion, we don't do nothing and we don't just do something. We have to figure out how do we bring back integrity through process as well as our infrastructure to include the type of machines that we're using. We have to get control of this, right? And I think it needs to be led by the states.
Yeah, and I
right?
think
Because federal government doesn't know how to resolve this issue. They're trying to seize more control by allowing more breakdown in terms of ballot harvesting and all this other craziness.
Yeah, and I think we've seen some good efforts just to more on the paper ballot side, though, because we had such an issue. Like you said, more envelopes than, more ballots than envelopes. Like what is going on here? And they make so much sense. We get a bunch, federal government has hated it. Merrick Garland cracked down on Georgia and Arizona and all of these states just proposing, maybe we should implement a signature match. And several states have had to go to court to defend that, which I don't, I always love to work out, like, how would the left even argue for that one? What would a signature match? Who would that hurt? And
well, that's a reasonable control, right? Because that was already in place. But if my memory serves me correctly, I might be off on the numbers slightly, but I think it was at 70 or 75% in terms of signature match verification level, and they brought it down to like 30 to 35%.
Yeah.
You bring it down that low, basically any signature passes. We wouldn't want that on our checks. We wouldn't want that on anything else that requires our authorization. So we should have the same level of protection and integrity and controls on voting as we do our financial system.
Yeah, I don't think that's too much to ask. And especially if you're going to make an argument like, oh, we can't have voter ID, we can't have anything, like, all right, then signature match. Like, what's wrong with that? You're saying everyone has access to a signature. And if there was some kind of physical restraint there are accommodations in law for that as well. So I'm like, this hurts nobody, common sense. But the voting machines kind of slide by because no one's really quite sure how to handle them. And I'm always wondering, like, why do they have to be, they're not local networks, they're all on Wi-Fi and stuff. I'm like, this seems very vulnerable, just like from my very limited knowledge of how this stuff, incredibly limited.
And anything left in the cloud, right, and other elements, I don't know. We got to have a serious conversation.
Yeah, it's something I think we shifted to so easily, but we didn't really consider the long-term ramifications of this. And then, it's obviously going to be a hyper partisan issue forever because it's about elections.
Right.
But I did think it was funny how they hedged that report. And I think it was Newsmax or OAN had to pay Dominion Voting for reporting on the lawsuits against Dominion Voting. They had to pay them because it hurt them. That Dominion Voting said that it hurt their reputation, that other people were reporting on the fact that they were being sued, which was dismissed mostly on standing.
I know Dominion sued Fox, and I think after that lawsuit, I'm not saying that there's a nexus between the two, but I do know that when that lawsuit was launched, and it was up there, it was, I think, near $1 billion or more, or something crazy astronomical number. Lou Dobbs was let go, and others, right? And I still don't know if that was settled or what have you, but there is a connection there, and I think Newsmax made certain moves, so that way I don't think they suffered the same level of lawsuits or allegations, if at all.
Yeah, but is Dominion going to sue the federal government now for making these accusations? Which they sued a news agency for reporting on accusations that other people made. So I would love.
They better have the proof.
Yeah, I want all of that to come out. That would be a fun one. But my light story of the week is Hunter Biden, just as a whole, just about him. A couple of good stories this week. I don't know if you saw them, John. First off, RNC actually put out a really good ad, which I'm always a little bit surprised when our committees do a really good job. Really great ad tying Joe Biden to all of Hunter's shady business deals. Got it up on Free Press Fail if anyone wants to check it out. Super, super good. Just has all the emails, like Hunter saying 10% for the big guy, the pictures of Joe and Hunter, in China, in Mexico, in Ukraine, very damning, super good. So that ad comes out. I thought it was great. And then an amazing story about, tied to the same text messages that fueled the RNC ad. Hunter apparently has some amateur porn up on the interwebs.
Oh, God.
But this is the best part. That part's not shocking considering the contents of his laptop. He texted his dad the links of it. And I'm not really sure why, or if that was an accident. But I think that if it was an accident, that gaffe might be one of the biggest Biden gaffes. Just it's Hunter's, not Joe's.
Oh my goodness. Ooh. I tell you, he's the gift that keeps on giving, but we have to cash in on the gifts. And I don't understand that we have so much evidence. Your viewers, and I'm quite sure you have as well, all heard of the saying that, a DA, district attorney, can indict a ham sandwich if they want to, right? So if they can indict a ham sandwich, we've got, with all this wealth of information, I don't understand why there's not an indictment.
I guess the key part of that phrase is they can indict a ham sandwich if they want to, and they just don't. There's that thing about government being so for the government, not the people. I think that benefits Hunter a lot because anything that you would indict him for is indicting him a little bit. It's indicting everybody else in government a lot.
You know what? I bet you, right? Because wherever his business entities are registered, the states have some level of jurisdiction and rights And I'm quite sure there's something within the state code that a lawsuit can actually be lodged, right? That has nothing to do with the federal government.
I mean,
You have to start from somewhere.
oh yeah, and I'm so confident that if this was switched and this was, Trump's kid, they'd be indicted in like 8 different states. And
Absolutely.
and we know that, like we saw more movement on the Russia hoax, which we have all but proven is a complete hoax. So much movement from local New York, all over it. They're getting Trump on whatever they can. And our congressional investigations, bunch of state investigations, and it turns out to be nothing but a waste of money. But this real stuff with real witnesses, they're like, later. But I just think it's so intertwined that there's so many people in government who will get in trouble if Hunter gets in trouble, that they've just decided it's mutually assured destruction. They're not going to touch it.
Wow. This is a common thread, where the elite they're protected, while, the working class, Main Street America, has to obey and suffer all types of consequences. There needs to be equality in that regard as well, right? He needs to be brought to justice because he's been flaunting it.
Literally in porn, apparently.
Right, literally, exactly, literally. And we have all of the evidence and information. This would be the easiest case. And we also have witnesses, right? His business partners and others. This would be the easiest case to put together, right? At the state level, and probably several states could join in, because I'm quite sure that he violated several state laws. So if the federal government does not want to move, we can bring it down to the states.
Yeah, that would be awesome. But we'll see how it goes. If not, at least we've got some good 2022 material, maybe 2024 as well, because that guy, just like you said, just keeps on giving.
Exactly.
But I guess that is all we have for this week. Thanks for joining us. And obviously you have to subscribe for more episodes, get the alerts first. And we will see you next week.
All right, take care.